Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Marianne, John, Constanza, and Mario. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, chapter-by-chapter fiction readings, and collections found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's continue a month of travel explorations with more from an epic journey. We're reading The North Pole, its discovery in 1909 under the auspices of the Peary Arctic Club by Robert E. Peary, with an introduction by Theodore Roosevelt and a foreword by Gilbert H. Grosvenor, director and editor of the National Geographic Society. Originally published in 1910 by Frederick A. Stokes Company and Greenwood Press Publishers, New York. Let's pick up right where we left off at the beginning of Chapter 4 as we slowly work our way north. Let's begin. Chapter 4: Up to Cape York. On Sunday, July 19th, we sent a boat ashore at Point Amour Light with telegrams back home, the last. I wondered what my first dispatch would be the following year. At Cape St. Charles, we dropped anchor in front of the whaling station. 2 whales had been captured there the day before, and I immediately bought one of them as food for the dogs. This meat was stowed on the quarterdeck of the Roosevelt. There are several of these whale factories on the Labrador coast. We stopped again at Hawks Harbor, where the Eric, our auxiliary supply steamer, was awaiting us with some 25 tons of whale meat on board. And an hour or 2 later, a beautiful white yacht followed us in. I recognized her as Harkness's Wakiva of the New York Yacht Club. Twice during the winter she had lain close to the Roosevelt in New York at the East 24th Street Pier, coaling between her voyages. And now, by a strange chance, the 2 vessels lay side by side again in this little out-of-the-way harbor on the Labrador coast. No 2 ships could be more unalike than these 2. One white as snow, her brasswork glittering in the sun, speedy, light as an arrow. The other black, slow, heavy, almost as solid as a rock, each built for a special purpose and adapted to that purpose. Mr. Harkness and a party of friends, including several ladies, came on board the Roosevelt, and the dainty dresses of our feminine guests further accentuated the blackness, the strength, and the not over-cleanly condition of our ship. We stopped once more at Turnavik Island, a fishing station belonging to Captain Bartlett's father, and took on a consignment of Labrador skin boots, for which we should have use in the north. Just before reaching the island, we encountered a furious thunderstorm. It was the most northerly thunderstorm which I remember having experienced. I recall, however, that on our upward voyage in 1905, we ran into very heavy thunderstorms, with electrical displays quite as sharp as any encountered in Gulf storms on voyages in southern waters, though the storms of 1905 were met in the neighborhood of Cabot Strait, far south of those of 1908. Our voyage to Cape York was a peaceful one, lacking even the small excitement of the same journey 3 years before, when not far from Cape St. George, all hands were startled by an alarm of fire which started in one of the main deck beams, from the uptake of the boilers. Nor were we so plagued with fog in the early stages of our journey as we were in 1905. In fact, every omen was auspicious from the very start, so auspicious indeed that perhaps the more superstitious of the sailors thought our luck was too good to last, while one member of our expedition was continually knocking on wood just as a precaution, as he expressed it. It would be rash to say that his forethought had much to do with our success, but it eased his mind at all events. As we steamed steadily northward, the nights grew shorter and shorter, and lighter, so that when we crossed the Arctic Circle, soon after midnight on July 26th, we were in perpetual daylight. I have crossed the circle some 20 times going and coming, so the fine edge of that experience has been somewhat dulled for me. But the Arctic tenderfeet among my party, Dr. Goodsall, Macmillan, and Borup, were appropriately impressed. They felt as one feels in crossing the equator the first time, that it is an event. The Roosevelt, steaming ever northward, was now well on her way to one of the most interesting of all Arctic localities. It is the little oasis amid a wilderness of ice and snow along the west coast of northern Greenland, midway between Kane Basin on the north and Melville Bay on the south. Here, in striking contrast to the surrounding country, is animal and vegetable life in plenty, and in the course of the last 100 years, some half-dozen Arctic expeditions have wintered here. Here, too, is the home of a little tribe of Eskimos. This little refuge is about a 3,000-mile sail from New York, and about 2,000 miles as the bird flies. It is about 600 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and about halfway from that great latitudinal mark to the pole itself. Here, the great Arctic night averages 110 days in winter, during which time no ray of light falls upon the sight save that of the moon and the stars, while in summer the sun is visible every moment for an equal number of days. Within the limits of this little country is found the favorite haunt of the reindeer, which finds sufficient pasturage. But we are interested for the present in this unique spot only in passing, and for the reason that here we picked up the denizens of the frigid zone who were to help us in our struggle farther north. Before we reached this odd little oasis, but several hundred miles beyond the Arctic Circle, we came to a most significant point in our upward journey. marking as it did the grimness of the task before us. No civilized man can die in this savage Northland without his grave having a deep meaning for those who come afterwards. And constantly as we sailed on, these voiceless reminders of heroic bones told their silent but powerful story. At the southern limit of Melville Bay, we passed the Duck Islands, where is the little graveyard of the Scotch whalers who were the pioneers in forcing the passage of Melville Bay, and who died there, waiting for the ice to open. These graves date back to the beginning of the 19th century. From this point on, the Arctic Highway is marked by the graves of those who have fallen in the terrible fight with cold and hunger. These rude rock piles bring home to any thoughtful person the meaning of Arctic exploration. The men who lie there were not less courageous, not less intelligent than the members of my own party. They were simply less fortunate. Let us look along that highway for a moment and consider these memorials. At North Star Bay are one or two graves of men from the British ship North Star, which wintered there in 1850. Out on the Peary Islands is the nameless grave of one of the ill-fated Calistenius expedition. Still farther north at Etah is the grave of Sontag, the astronomer of Hayes's expedition, and a little above it, that of Olsen of Kane's party. On the opposite side are the unmarked places where 16 of Greely's ill-fated party died. Still farther north, on the eastern or Greenland side, is the grave of Hall, the American commander of the Polaris expedition. On the western or Grantland side are the graves of 2 or 3 sailors of the British Arctic expedition of 1876. And right on the shore of the central polar sea, near Cape Sheridan, is the grave of the Dane, Peterson, the interpreter of the British Arctic expedition of 1876. These graves stand as mute records of former efforts to win the prize, and they give a slight indication of the number of brave but less fortunate men who have given the last possession of mortal life in their pursuit of the Arctic goal. The first time I saw the graves of the whalers on Duck Islands, I sat there in the Arctic sunlight looking at those headboards, sobered with a realization of what they meant. When I first saw Sontag's grave at Etah, I carefully replaced the stones around it as a tribute to a brave man. At Cape Sabine, where Greenlee's party died, I was the first man to step into the ruins of the stone hut after the 7 survivors were taken away years before. The first man, and I stepped into those ruins in a blinding snowstorm late in August and saw there the mementos of those unfortunates. Passing the Duck Islands on the upward voyage, approaching Cape York in 1908 and thinking of the graves there, I little dreamed that a loved member of my own party, Professor Ross G. Marvin, who ate at my table and acted as my secretary, was fated to add his name to this long list of Arctic victims, and that his grave, in uncounted fathoms of black water, was to be the most northerly grave on this earth. We reached Cape York on the first day of August. Cape York is the bold, bluff headland which marks the southern point of the stretch of Arctic coast inhabited by the Eskimos, the most northerly human beings in the world. It is the headland whose snowy cap I have seen so many times, rising in the distance above the horizon line of Melville Bay as my ships have steamed north. At the base of the headland nestles the most southerly of all the Eskimo villages, and it has marked the point of meeting year after year between the members of this tribe and myself. At Cape York, we were on the threshold of the actual work. I had on board the ship when I arrived there all the equipment and assistance which the civilized world could yield. Beginning there, I was to take on the tools, the material, the personnel that the Arctic regions themselves were to furnish for their own conquest. Cape York, or Melville Bay, is the dividing line between the civilized world on the one side and the Arctic world on the other. The Arctic world with its equipment of Eskimos, dogs, walrus, seal, fur clothing, and aboriginal experience. Behind me lay the civilized world, which was now absolutely useless, and which could give me nothing more. Ahead of me lay that trackless waste, through which I must literally cut my way to the goal. Even the ship's journey from Cape York to winter quarters on the north coast of Grant Land is not plain sailing. In fact, it is not sailing at all during the later stages. It is jamming and butting and dodging and hammering the ice, with always the possibility that the antagonist will hit back a body blow. It is like the work of a skilled heavyweight pugilist, or the work of an old Roman fighter with the cestus. Beyond Melville Bay, the world, or what we know as the world, is left behind. On leaving Cape York, we had exchanged the multifarious purposes of civilization for the two purposes for which there is room in those wide wastes: food for man and dog, and the covering of miles of distance. Behind me now lay everything that was mine, everything that a man personally loves: family, friends, home, and all those human associations which linked me with my kind. Ahead of me lay my dream, the goal of that irresistible impulse which had driven me for 23 years to measure myself time after time against the frigid no of the great North. Should I succeed? Should I return? Success in the attainment of 90 degrees north would not inevitably carry with it the safe return. We had learned that on recrossing the Big Lead in 1906. In the Arctic, the chances are always against the explorer. The inscrutable guardians of the secret appear to have a well-nigh inexhaustible reserve of trump cards to play against the intruder who insists upon dropping into the game. The life is a dog's life, but the work is a man's work. As we steamed northward from Cape York on the first day of August 1908, I felt that I was now in truth face to face with the final struggle. Everything in my life appeared to have led up to this day. All my years of work and all my former expeditions were merely preparations for this last and supreme effort. It has been said that well-directed labor toward a given end is an excellent kind of prayer for its attainment. If that be so, then prayer has been my portion for many years. Through all the seasons of disappointment and defeat, I had never ceased to believe that the great white mystery of the North must eventually succumb to the insistence of human experience and will, and standing there with my back to the world and my face toward that mystery, I believed that I should win in spite of all the powers of darkness and of desolation. Chapter 5. Welcome from the Eskimos. As we approached Cape York, which is farther from the pole in actual distance than New York is from Tampa, Florida, it was with a peculiar feeling of satisfaction that I saw the foremost of our Eskimo friends putting out to meet us in their tiny kayaks, or skin canoes. Here is the southernmost of the Eskimo villages, by which a permanent settlement is not meant, for these people are nomads. One year there may be 2 families there, another year 10, and still another season none at all, for the Eskimos seldom live more than a year or 2 in one place. As we neared the Cape, the headland was encircled and guarded by an enormous squadron of floating icebergs, which made it difficult for the Roosevelt to get near shore. But long before we reached these bergs, the hunters of the settlement were seen putting out to greet us. The sight of them skimming the water so easily in their frail kayaks was the most welcome spectacle I had seen since we sailed from Sydney. It seems fitting to give a good deal of attention at this point to the consideration of this interesting race, the most northerly people in all the world. For their help is one of the elements without which it is possible that the North Pole might never have been reached. These thoughts were in my mind as I saw my old friends coming out to meet us in their tiny kayaks, for I realized that I was once more in contact with these faithful dwellers of the North, who had been my constant companions for so many years, through all the varying circumstances and fortunes of my Arctic work, and from whom I was again to select the pick and flower of the hunters of the whole tribe, extending from Cape York to Etah, to assist in this last effort to win the prize. Since 1891, I had been living and working with these people. For 18 years I had been training them in my methods, or to put it another way, teaching them how to modify and concentrate their wonderful ice technique and endurance so as to make them useful for our purposes. I had studied their individual characters, as any man studies the human tools with which he expects to accomplish results, until I knew just who to select for a quick, courageous dash, and just which dogged, unswerving ones would, if necessary, walk straight through hell for the object I had placed before them. I know every man, woman, and child in the tribe, from Cape York to Etah. Prior to 1891, they had never been farther north than their own habitat. 18 years ago, I went to these people, and my first work was from their country as a base. Much nonsense has been told by travelers in remote lands about the Aborigines regarding as gods the white men who come to them, but I have never placed much credence in these stories. My own experience has been that the average Aborigine is just as content with his own way as we are with ours, just as convinced of his own superior knowledge, and that he adjusts himself with his knowledge in regard to things in the same way that we do. The Eskimos are not brutes. They are just as human as we are. They know that I am their friend, and they have abundantly proved themselves my friends. When I went ashore at Cape York, I found there 4 or 5 families living in their summer tupiks or skin tents. From them I learned what had happened in the tribe in the last 2 years. who had died, in what families children had been born, where this family and that family were then living. That is, the distribution of the tribe for that particular summer. I thus learned where to find the other men I wanted. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning when we arrived at Cape York. I selected the few men needed from that place, told them that when the sun reached a certain point in the heavens that evening, the ship would sail, and that they and their families and possessions must be aboard the ship. As hunting is the only industry in these Eskimo villages, and as their goods are of an easily portable character, consisting mainly of tents, dogs and sledges, a few skins, pots and pans, they were able to transport themselves to the Roosevelt in our boats without much loss of time. As soon as they were on board, we started north again. There was no question of their willingness to follow me. They were only too glad to go. These men knew from past experience that once enrolled as members of my expedition, there was no danger that their wives or children would suffer from hunger, and they knew also that at the end of the journey, when we brought them back to their homes, I would turn over to them the remaining supplies and equipment of the expedition, which would ensure living for another year in absolute plenty. That, in comparison with the other members of their tribe, they would indeed be multi-millionaires. An intense and restless curiosity is one of the peculiar characteristics of these people. As an illustration, one winter years ago, when Mrs. Peary was in Greenland with me, an old woman of the tribe walked 100 miles from her village to our winter quarters in order that she might meet this woman. It may perhaps be fairly said that it has been my fortune to utilize the Eskimos for the purpose of discovery to a degree equaled by no other explorer, and for that reason it may not seem amiss to suspend the general narrative long enough to give a little information regarding their characteristics. The more so, as without some knowledge of these peculiar people, it would be impossible for anyone really to understand the workings of my expedition to the North Pole. It has been a fundamental principle of all my Arctic work to have Eskimos for the rank and file of my sledge parties. Without the skillful handiwork of the women, we should lack the warm fur clothing which is absolutely essential to protect us from the winter cold, while the Eskimo dog is the only tractive force suitable for serious Arctic sledge work. The members of this tribe or family, inhabiting the western coast of Greenland from Cape York to Etah, are in many ways quite different from the Eskimos of Danish Greenland, or those of any other Arctic territory. There are now between 220 and 230 in the tribe. They are without government, but they are not lawless. They are utterly uneducated according to our standard, yet they exhibit a remarkable degree of intelligence. In temperament like children, with all a child's delight in little things, they are nevertheless enduring as the most mature of civilized men and women, and the best of them are faithful unto death. Without religion, and having no idea of God, they will share their last meal with anyone who is hungry, while the aged and the helpless among them are taken care of as a matter of course. They are healthy and pure-blooded. They have no vices, no intoxicants, and no bad habits, not even gambling. Altogether, they are a people unique upon the face of the earth. A friend of mine well calls them the philosophic anarchists of the North. I have been studying the Eskimos for 18 years, and no more effective instruments for Arctic work could be imagined than these plump, bronze-skinned, keen-eyed, and black-maned people of nature. I have a sincere interest in these people, aside from their usefulness, and my plan from the beginning has been to give them such aid and instruction as would fit them more effectively to cope with their own austere environment, and to refrain from teaching them anything which would tend to weaken their self-confidence or to make them discontented with their lot. The suggestions of some well-meaning persons that they be transported to a more hospitable region would, if carried out, cause their extermination in 2 or 3 generations. Our variable climate they could not endure, as they are keenly susceptible to pulmonary and bronchial affections. Our civilization, too, would only soften and corrupt them, as their inheritance is one of physical hardship, while to our complex environment they could not adjust themselves without losing the very qualities which constitute their chief virtues. To Christianize them would be quite impossible, but the cardinal graces of faith, hope, and charity they seem to have already, for without them they could never survive the 6 months' night and the many rigors of their home. My various expeditions into that region have had the effect of raising the Eskimos from most abject destitution, lacking every appliance and accessory of civilized life, to a position of relative affluence, with the best material for their weapons, their harpoons and lances, the best of wood for their sledges, the best of cutlery, knives, hatchets, and saws for their work, as well as cooking utensils. Formerly they were dependent upon the most primitive hunting weapons. Now they have repeating rifles, breech-loading shotguns, and an abundance of ammunition. There was not a rifle in the tribe when I first went there. As they have no vegetables and live solely on meat, blood, and blubber, the possession of guns and ammunition has increased the food-producing capacity of every hunter, and relieved the whole tribe from the formerly ever-present danger of starvation for a family or even an entire village. There is a theory, first advanced by Sir Clements Markham, ex-president of the Royal Geographical Society of London, that the Eskimos are the remnants of an ancient Siberian tribe, the Onkalan, that the last members of this tribe were driven out on the Arctic Ocean by the fierce waves of Tartar invasion in the Middle Ages, and that they found their way to the New Siberian Islands, thence eastward over lands yet undiscovered to Grinnell Land and Greenland. I am inclined to believe in the truth of this theory for the following reasons. Some of the Eskimos are of a distinctly Mongolian type, and they display many characteristics such as mimicry, ingenuity, and patience in mechanical duplication. There is a strong resemblance between their stone houses and the ruins of the houses found in Siberia. It has also been suggested that their invocation of the spirits of their dead may be a survival of Asian ancestor worship. As a general rule, the Eskimos are short in stature, as are the Chinese and Japanese, though I could name several men who stand about 5 feet 10 inches. The women are short and plump. They all have powerful torsos, but their legs are rather slender. The muscular development of the men is astonishing, though their roundness hides the differentiation of the muscles. These people have no written speech, and their language is agglutinative, with complicated prefixes and suffixes, by which they extend a word to a considerable length from the original stem. The language is relatively easy to acquire, and during my first summer in Greenland, I gained a fair knowledge of it. In addition to their ordinary speech, they have an esoteric language known only to the adults of the tribe. I cannot say wherein it differs from the other, having made no attempt to learn it, and I doubt if any white man has been fully taught this secret speech, as the knowledge is carefully guarded by its possessors. The Eskimos of this region have not, as a rule, applied themselves to the study of English, for they were clever enough to see that we could learn their language more easily than they could learn ours. Occasionally, however, an Eskimo will startle all hands by rolling out an English phrase or sentence, and he seems to have a special aptitude in picking up from the sailors phrases of slang or profanity. On the whole, these people are easily elated, easily discouraged. They delight in playing tricks on each other and on the sailors, are usually good-natured, and when they are sulky, there is no profit in being vexed with them. Their mercurial temperament is nature's provision for carrying them through the long, dark night, for if they were morose, the whole tribe would long ago have lain down and died of discouragement, so rigorous is their lot. In managing the Eskimos, it is necessary to consider their peculiar temperament. They are keenly appreciative of kindness, but they will impose upon a weak or vacillating person. The fundamental point in all my dealings with them has been always to mean just what I say and to have things done exactly as ordered. I have made it to their interest to do what I want done. For example, the best all-round man on a long sledge journey got more than the others. A record was always kept of the game secured by each person, and the best hunter got a special prize. The man who killed the muskox with the finest set of horns, and the man who killed the deer with the most magnificent antlers were specially rewarded. An Eskimo never forgets a broken promise, nor a fulfilled one. It would be misleading to infer that almost any man who went to the Eskimos with gifts could obtain from them the kind of service they have given me, for it must be remembered that they have known me personally for nearly 20 years. Old Ikwa, for example, who is the father of the girl for whose possession hot-hearted young Ukwea of my North Pole party fought his way with me to the goal, was the first Eskimo I hired away back in 1891. Chapter 6. An Arctic Oasis. In a little Arctic oasis lives the meager and scattered handful of the Eskimo population. A little oasis along the frowning western coast of northern Greenland between Melville Bay and Kane Basin. This region is 3,000 miles north of New York City, as a steamer goes. It lies about halfway between the Arctic Circle and the Pole, within the confines of the Great Night. Here, taking the mean latitude, for 110 days in summer, the sun never sets. For 110 days in winter, the sun never rises, and no ray of light, save from the icy stars and the dead moon, falls on the frozen landscape. There is a savage grandeur in this coast, carved by eternal conflict with storms and glaciers, bergs and grinding ice fields. But behind the frowning outer mask nestle in summer many grass-carpeted, flower-sprinkled, sun-kissed nooks. Millions of little auks breed along this shore. Between the towering cliffs are glaciers, which launch at intervals their fleets of bergs upon the sea. Before these cliffs lies the blue water, dotted with masses of glistening ice of all shapes and sizes. Behind the cliffs is the great Greenland ice cap, silent, eternal, immeasurable, the abode, say the Eskimos, of evil spirits and the souls of the unhappy dead. In some places on this coast in summer, the grass is as thick and long as on a New England farm. Here bloom poppies with dandelions, buttercups, and saxifrage, though to the best of my knowledge the flowers are all devoid of perfume. I have seen bumblebees even north of Whale Sound. There are flies and mosquitoes, and even a few spiders. Among the fauna of this country are the reindeer, the Greenland caribou, the fox, both blue and white, the Arctic hare, the polar bear, and perhaps once in a generation a stray wolf. But in the long sunless winter, this whole region, cliffs, ocean, glaciers, is covered with a pall of snow that shows a ghastly gray in the wan starlight. When the stars are hidden, all is black, void, and soundless. When the wind is blowing, if a man ventures out, he seems to be pushed backward by the hands of an invisible enemy, while a vague, unnameable menace lurks before and behind him. It is small wonder the Eskimos believe that evil spirits walk upon the wind. During the winter, these patient and cheerful people of the north live in igloos, or huts built of stones and earth. It is only when they are traveling, as sometimes during the moonlit period of the month, that they live in the snow igloos, which 3 good Eskimos can build in an hour or 2, and which we built at the end of every day's march on our sledge journey to the pole. In summer they live in the tupiks or skin tents. The stone houses are permanent, and a good one will last perhaps 100 years, with a little repairing of the roof in summer. Igloos are found in groups or villages at intervals along the coast, from Cape York Bay to Anaratak. As the people are nomadic, these permanent dwellings belong to the tribe and not to individuals, constituting thus a crude sort of Arctic socialism. One year, all the houses in a settlement may be occupied. The next year, none, or only 1 or 2. These houses are about 6 feet high by 8 to 10 feet wide by 10 to 12 feet long, and one may be constructed in a month. An excavation is made in the earth, which forms the floor of the house. Then the walls are built up solidly with stones chinked with moss. Long, flat stones are laid across the top of the walls. This roof is covered with earth, and the whole house is banked in with snow. The construction of the arched roof is on the plan which engineers know as the cantilever, and not that of the Roman arch. The long flat stones which form the roof are weighted and counterweighted at the outer ends, and in all my Arctic experience, I have never known the stone roof of an igloo to fall upon the inmates. There are never any complaints made to the building department. There is no door in the side, but a hole in the floor at the entrance leads to a tunnel, sometimes 10, sometimes 15, or even 25 feet in length, through which the tenants crawl into their home. there is always a small window in the front of the igloo. The window space is not glazed, of course, but is covered with the thin intestinal membrane of seals skillfully seamed together. To a traveler across the dark and snowy winter waste, the yellow light from the interior lamp is visible sometimes a long distance away. At the farther end of the igloo is the bed platform, raised about 1.5 feet above the earthen floor. Usually, this platform is not built, but is the natural level of the earth, the standing space being dug before it. In some houses, however, the bed platform is made of long, flat stones raised upon stone supports. When the Eskimos are ready to move into the stone houses in the fall, they cover the bed platform first with grass, which they bring in by the sledge load. The grass is then covered with seal skins. Above these are spread deer skins or muskox skins, which form the mattress. Deer skins are used for blankets. Pajamas are not in fashion with the Eskimos. They simply remove all their clothes and crawl in between the deer skins. The lamp, which stands on a large stone at the front of the bed platform on one side, is kept burning all the time, whether the family is asleep or awake. An imaginative person might liken this lamp to an ever-burning sacred flame upon the stone altar of the Eskimo home. It serves also as a stove for heating and cooking, and makes the igloo so warm that the inhabitants wear little clothing when indoors. They sleep with their heads toward the lamp, so the woman may reach out and tend it. On the other side of the house, food is generally stored. When two families occupy one igloo, there may be a second lamp on the other side, and in that case, the food must be stored under the bed. The temperature of these houses varies from 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit on the bed platform and near the roof, to something below freezing point at the floor level. There is a little air hole in the center of the roof, but in the happy home of an Eskimo family in winter, the atmosphere could almost be handled with a shovel. Often, in winter traveling, I have been obliged to sleep in one of these hospitable igloos. On such occasions I have made the best of things, as a man would if compelled to sleep in a 10th-rate railroad hotel or a slum lodging house, but I have tried to forget the experience as soon as possible. It is not well for an Arctic explorer to be too fastidious. A night in one of these igloos, with the family at home, is an offense to every civilized sense, especially that of smell. But there are times when a man, after a long sledge journey in the terrible cold and wind, hungry and footsore, will welcome the dim light shining through the translucent window of an igloo, as one welcomes the light of home. It means warmth and comfort, supper and blessed sleep. With the coming of the summer, the stone and earth houses become damp, dark holes, and the roofs are taken off to dry and ventilate the interior. The family then moves outside and sets up the tupik or skin tent, which is their home from about the 1st of June till sometime in September. The tupik is made of seal skins with the hair on the inside. 10 or 12 skins sewed together in one large piece make a tent. It is stretched on poles, high in front and sloping toward the back, thus offering the least possible resistance to the wind, the edges held down with stones. The earth floor of these tents is 6 or 8 feet wide and 8 or 10 feet long, according to the size of the family. In recent years, the Eskimos have adopted an improvement upon the building customs of the West Coast natives, and many of them have an entrance extension to their tents made of transparent tanned sealskins, thick enough to keep out the rain, but not the light. This adds to the roominess and comfort of their summer dwellings. A usual practice among the better class of Eskimos is to use the old tupik of the previous summer for a rain or weather guard to the new tent. In heavy winds or heavy summer rains, the old tupik is simply spread over the new one, thus giving a double thickness and protection to the owners. The bed platform in the tupik is now generally made of lumber, which I have furnished, raised on stones, and in pleasant weather the cooking is done outside. Oil is the only fuel for heat, light, and cooking. The women trim the lamps so well that there is no smoke from them, unless there is a draft in the tent or igloo. They cut small pieces of blubber, which they lay on moss and ignite, and the heat from the moss dries out the oil, making a surprisingly hot flame. Until I gave them matches, they had only the primitive means of ignition by flint and steel, which they obtained from a vein of pyrites. When I first went up there, all their lamps and rectangular pots were made of soapstone, 2 or 3 veins of which are found in that country. Their ability to utilize the soapstone and pyrites is an illustration of their intelligence and ingenuity. As a rule, little clothing is worn in the tupiks in warm weather, as the normal summer temperature is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the strong sunlight may go as high as 85 or even 95. The trial marriage is an ineradicable custom among the Eskimos. If a young man and woman are not suited with each other, they try again, and sometimes several times, but when they find mates to whom they are adapted, the arrangement is generally permanent. If 2 men want to marry the same woman, they settle the question by a trial of strength, and the better man has his way. These struggles are not fights, as the disputants are amiable. They are simply tests of wrestling, or sometimes of pounding each other on the arm to see which man can stand the pounding the longer. Their fundamental acceptance of the proposition that might is right in such matters sometimes extends to a man saying to the husband of a woman, "I am the better man." In such case, the husband has either to prove his superiority in strength or yield the woman to the other. If a man grows tired of his wife, he simply tells her there is not room for her in his igloo. She may return to her parents if they are living. She may go to a brother or a sister, or she may send word to some man in the tribe that she is now at liberty and is willing to start life again. In these cases of primitive divorce, the husband keeps one or all of the children if he wants them. If not, the woman takes them with her. The Eskimos do not have many children, 2 or 3 being the usual number. The woman does not take her husband's name in any case. Akatingwa, for instance, will remain Akatingwa, whether she has had one husband or several. Children do not address their parents as father and mother, but call them by their names, though sometimes very small children use a diminutive, which corresponds to our mama. My own observations of this interesting people have taught me to repose no confidence whatever in the tales of barbaric cruelty which I have heard of them. On the contrary, they must be ranked as a humane people. Moreover, they have always been quick to grasp the purposes that I have had in view and to bend their energies toward achieving the ends for which my expeditions have been striving. Their humanity, as has been indicated, takes a form that would delight a socialist. They are generous and hospitable, almost without exception. As a general rule, good and bad fortune are shared. The tribe shares in the proceeds of good luck on the part of the hunters, and as their existence depends on hunting, this accounts in large measure for the preservation of the tribe. And with that, we have reached the end of Chapter 6, which seems as good a place as any to end this evening's reading from the North Pole, its discovery in 1909 under the auspices of the Peary Arctic Club by Robert Peary. To be perfectly honest, there's quite a bit here that I skipped over, Mr. Peary having rather a large opinion of himself, but I think you got the gist of it. If you'd like to read this fascinating work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.